So we'll kind of keep it short. We'll go easy. My name is Karthikeya Bajpayee, and I'll be presenting along with Ishta Ghosh. Our study, as Gustav mentioned, is focused on EKO India, which is a mobile payments platform in India, and has been briefly touched upon by Mani and Deepthi in their profile. And the motivation for our study, as our title sort of states, is examining the organizational shift from savings towards remittance products in the bank-led model which is prevalent in India. We find this curious because this seems to be contrary to a lot of evidence in telecom-led models, which have traditionally had remittance services primarily and are moving towards incorporating remittance-based services and features. And I'd like to begin our discussion by showing a short, very short video of EKO CSP, who's talking about his experience with EKO. And I'm hoping that that this video can sort of foreshadow some of the features that we will be talking about further in our presentation.
Last year June में EKO ने charge with bank access कर दिया 2% कर दिया below 5,000 and above 5,000 100 rupees maximum charge कर दिया. उसके बाद भी कस्टमर EKO काउंटर पे आके खुश है क्योंकि बैंक में उसे लाइन लगना पड़ता है, टाइम वेस्ट होता है, पर्ची भरनी पड़ती है. हमारे में कुछ ऐसा नहीं, आएगा अकाउंट नंबर लिखेगा और अपना फ़ोन नंबर देगा, दैट्स इट. उसको वेरीफाई करके हम उसके अकाउंट में पैसा भेज देंगे.
So to begin with, I just wanted to sort of give some background on the banking correspondent model in India, because EKO is a BC themselves. So the banking correspondent model is the branchless banking model in India. It allows for civil society organizations such as NGOs and MFIs to act as intermediaries between unbanked populations and banking institutions. Within these BCs, technology service providers have turned out to be very prominent BCs, and they've been quite successful too. So a technology service provider is a BC which will be providing both the technology infrastructure as well as the agent network. And EKO India in particular has been a very successful TSP in its own regard in India. And it's also a very prominent player in terms of being a mobile phone-based platform, which amongst the technologies present in India, it's sort of unique in itself. And in terms of the avatars of EKO that we'll be looking at, it'll be EKO as a banking correspondent and EKO as a technology service provider. And the difference between these would be that in terms of a banking correspondent, you provide the infrastructure, the agent network, and you do process the payments themselves. So in case of, say, remittance services, as the gentleman in the video was talking about. As a technology service provider, they will be providing the infrastructure, but will be not processing in the sense of they will not be initiating transactions. They will be subsidiary to some other project. So we'll be talking a little bit more about these. In terms of the relationship that we're focusing on in this project, we're looking at the relationship between EKO and State Bank of India. So the State Bank of India is the largest bank in India. It's a public sector bank. And it's been the driver for a lot of banking correspondent related activity. It's been one of the primary drivers of the BC model just because of its size and sort of the regulatory pressures that the RBI places on it. And just to give an example, like in Bihar, EKO is one of 8 BCs that exist in that region. And SBI sort of, the way it looks at its BCs is that it has national level BCs, it has circle level BCs, which are like banking circles, and it has regional BCs, which will be like smaller areas. So since EKO is a national BC, it can theoretically be deployed at any point in India in the sort of the large branch chain that SBI sort of operates. And in terms of our data collection, we did about a month and a half of data collection, like 45 days of data collection, which was spread over 2.5 months. We traveled to 4 sites, New Delhi, Patna, Lucknow, and Varanasi. I'll sort of just give a brief description of each of the sites to give an idea of the context that these sites have presented in terms of the banking correspondent model and EKO in particular. New Delhi is sort of it's the capital of India, and it's one of the the major migration destinations. So it's a great spot for remittance-based products. Most of those migrants are sending money back. It's just like the agent in the video at the start. Patna is the capital city of the state of Bihar, and it's the place where EKO and SBI started their savings product. And the idea was that this would drive financial inclusion in terms of opening savings accounts for people who previously did not have access to it. Lucknow is a recent EKO operation in the sense that they have just started remittance-based offerings there, and they're trying to diversify over time. They've had some sort of issues in terms of technology infrastructure. They wanted biometric things which were supposed to come but didn't. So it's still a growing market for them. And in Varanasi, they operate primarily as a TSP for Cashpur, which is a local MFI. Similarly, in Patna too, EKO exists as a TSP for Saija, which is a microfinance group. So the way a TSP sort of operation for EKO would be is that the group members would have to do their weekly loan repayments. So they would be told to go on Thursday to an EKO agent and do their loan repayment. So sort of the driver is the MFI, as opposed to sort of EKO is not driving that transaction. We did 62 interviews in total. There were a lot of customer interviews, which were primarily at the site itself. We would wait at CSP agents, like customer service points, and talk to customers as and when they came in. These would be like 15-20 minutes of interaction at the spot. We also did a bunch of in-depth interviews with banking representatives, EKO representatives, MFI personnel, and agents themselves. And we also collected some observational data. The gentlemen in this picture are like remittance agents in New Delhi. In terms of sample demographics, customers, we tried to, even though we were not getting adequate number of female customers, we sort of tried to game that sampling and in that sense to get more women into the sample. The average age was 33. The income range is like 5,000 to 30,000, so it would fall under the sort of the lower income bracket. In terms of agents, we were unsuccessful in finding any women agent. There were only male agents. In the picture here, the lady operating the phone is an agent for an MFI, and those are the group members around. This is a case in which EKO is a TSP. And the commission ranges are like, say, 1,000 to 10,000, with depending on their context in which agents are placed. So supposing in New Delhi, which is a great place for remittance-based services because of the high presence of migrants, this would be on the higher side. But in the case of Patna, which is traditionally a sender of migrants as opposed to a receiver of migrants, this would be on the much lower side. And Ishita will present some of our preliminary findings in this project.
Okay, so after about 2 months of sort of going over our data, we analyzed it, we're going through repeated rounds of coding. We have some preliminary findings, which I'll talk about right now. I guess the most poignant of these was just the differences we found between the remittance and the savings services in and of themselves. The first thing, and I mean, just the reason I call them poignant in the first place is because we believe that this was affecting their uptake on the mobile backbone in the first place. So what we saw, over the course of a fieldwork was that the remittance services were sort of driven by an explicit need in the market, in the sense that if there is a need to move money around in the market and there's a lack of supply for a suitable product that sort of addresses that demand, then any affordable and convenient remittance product will sort of rush in to fill that gap. And also, remittance products tend to mimic the natural human migrant patterns, and this tends to be very typical in the developing, world context, where people tend to move around a lot in search of a better living. Saving services, on the other hand, tend to demonstrate a more implicit need in the market, especially among lower income populations. So people recognize that they need to save, that they need to put money away, especially in times of emergencies. However, they require initiative, discipline, and restraint to actually save. So in that sense, whoever we spoke to in terms of providers, in terms of even customers, they would sort of recognize that there needs to be very intensive sort of financial literacy drives that accompany the uptake of these saving services. And that makes the saving service a very expensive proposition for providers in the first place. So we also saw that, remittance, it's fairly intuitive, are one-time transactions in that they're discrete transactions. They begin and end in one session. Savings transactions, on the other hand, require a person to lock in their money with a provider for weeks, months, years, what have you. And this actually bears implications for the trust relationships that consumers might, share with the providers. And I'll talk about that in a later slide. The other thing we saw, which actually, I forget who, I think Deepthi talked about this in the previous panel, were the success metrics, like what metrics were being used to determine if savings or the remittance products were actually successful in a given context. And, as far as remittance goes, it's fairly straightforward. You just sort of count the transactional volume. And just as a note here, I know that in India, we don't really count the folks who are withdrawing money on the ecosystem because they tend to typically go to the state bank, bank branch or the ATM to withdraw. They don't really withdraw from the EKO agent as such, very seldom. So you're pretty much counting the folks who are sending money. And that's fairly straightforward. That's the success metric for remittances pretty much anywhere. But when it comes to savings accounts, and Deepthi mentioned this, they basically count the number of accounts opened and they don't really track the activity on the accounts. And this is interesting because what we saw is that it's fairly easy to get people to open up savings accounts. You have a canopy, you have some music blaring. These days with the introduction of no-frills accounts, where you don't have to sort of lock in a lot of money to start the savings account, people come, they put in a small amount of money, they open up an account, they forget about it, right? And so the fact that a savings product is successful based on that metric doesn't really mean anything. And I do agree with you, Deepthi, when you said that, for it to really include a sort of lower income population or to really include unbanked or unserved populations, it needs to track, the financial activity on those accounts as well. And finally, what we saw is that the way consumers were reacting to technology breakdowns or process failures in the ecosystem was very different when it came to the remittance or the saving services. Technology breakdowns would affect remittance users less adversely than they would savings customers. And this was primarily because savings customers had very high expectations from the savings providers. They wanted their savings system to be consistently secure and sound. Moreover, remittance users were typically sending much less than $200 at a time. And it was a hit that they were willing to take if there was indeed a breakdown, even for a little while. Moreover, what we saw was that remittance users can jump from provider to provider fairly easily. If they're not happy with one provider, there's somebody else, they can jump ship fairly easily. But when it comes to savings products, it's difficult to open a bank account. You can't just jump providers like that. So that long-term investment and that long-term relationship that they have with providers just makes their expectations from them that much higher. So these are some of the salient differences we saw, and I'm just going to move on to the next finding that we sort of saw, the issue of trust in the EKO ecosystem. So there are essentially three elements you can trust in the ecosystem. You trust the EKO brand, you trust the state bank, which is the bank that Karthik talked about, or you trust the agent himself. Now, I don't know who brought this up, I think Mani did, but the EKO brand by itself is not really well known in India, and it's because EKO has historically not spent too much money promoting themselves, right? So nobody really knows them. It's difficult to trust them when you don't know the brand. State Bank is a fairly well-known brand, and people do tend to trust the bank itself. Users will trust the agents when they have known the agent personally for a long time, and this isn't atypical because EKO will a lot of times select agents if they have been long-standing members of their immediate communities. But there are situations when a user has no relationship with either EKO, SBI, or the agent. And in that case, what we saw, and we saw instances of this during our fieldwork, was that they just test the service. It's very easy. So the remittance service is, amenable to sort of a one-time test, just because it's a one-time transaction. So a person will go, they'll just sort of remit 25 cents over the mobile backbone. It reaches to the desired recipient. They're like, you know what, this checks out, this works, I'm going to use it. It's very hard for them to test the savings product in the same manner because, your money is constantly locked in. You have to constantly keep track of it. So in that sense, we saw that it was easier for people, for new customers who aren't used to this mobile platform, for them to sort of start using remittance products on the mobile backbone as opposed to savings products. Also, there was a constant ongoing negotiation of trust between the consumer and the provider. And so again, this goes back to the technology breakdown and the process failures that I talked about. People were just not, very okay with technology failures when it came to their savings products. I'm going to move ahead. So I want to talk a little bit about the SBI-EKO relationship as well. So, as Karthik mentioned, State Bank is the largest bank. They're, very driven to fulfill the financial inclusion mandate in the country. So they would constantly tell EKO that, you know what, go ahead, open more retail agent outlets in rural areas in the country. And EKO's like, but we need more urban areas. We need to become financially sustainable as an organization, and then maybe we can tackle the financial inclusion agenda. And what this led to, in the negotiation of this tension, they sort of classified savings as the, financial inclusion quota and remittance under the load sharing agenda. So the SBI branches would see very heavy traffic, of remittance customers at their branches. So after some time, they just started sending any and every customer who was sending money lesser than $200 to their business correspondent, business correspondents. And not EKO specifically, but just their host of business correspondents. And basically, this categorization was very interesting because it sort of reveals how providers might think about savings and remittance. Savings, let's face it, when you have access to a bank account, a savings bank account, that is a more inclusive financial service than just having access to the capability of moving money around, right? At the same time, like I mentioned before, promoting savings accounts, selling savings services is a very expensive enterprise. And remittance practically sells itself if there is a need in the market with very minimal marketing investment. So in that sense, remittance is sort of the star product on the mobile backbone. And we believe that going forward, providers will be making money off the remittance product, be it the, bank-led model or the telecom-driven model. I'll also talk a little bit about the SBI-EKO liaison. This sort of percolated down to the very localized branch level, at least in the the cases that we saw. So like I said, the bank was not formally allowed to refer customers to one specific business correspondent unless there was a very good relationship that was being forged between that business correspondent and the bank. So in cases where the EKO representative had managed to sort of, make a specific bank manager happy, the bank would sort of refer customers to them. And this is interesting because the uptake of services goes beyond the product to sort of external relationships. I think I can skip the other 2 points for lack of time. And also, like, Karthik brought this up in the beginning of EKO's 2 avatars in India, that of it being a business correspondent, where it's sort of furnishing the infrastructure to complete payments, as well as initiating and completing those payments. Versus when it's a technology service provider, where it's, just furnishing the technology backend, that's all it's doing. And what we saw is that when EKO is working as a BC for a bank, as a business correspondent for a bank, they have to generate their own customer base. Primarily because SBI is not really driving EKO services sufficiently, and EKO by itself is not a very well-known brand. However, when it's working as a technology service provider, for the MFIs that Karthik brought up, Saija in Bihar and Kashpur in Banaras, they don't have to do any of that. They can just leverage the existing customer bases of these MFIs. And what we saw was a very fruitful partnership between EKO and these MFIs, with EKO being a technology service provider. And I don't know if am I out of Oh, I have 1 minute, yay. So, yeah, I mean, I can answer more questions about this if you guys have any, after the panel, but that was the general idea. So just in terms of EKO and where it's heading over the next, few years, we foresee that it's going to sort of engage in more meaningful collaborations with different banks. Not only that, it's going to try and increase the complexity of its products. So we're already seeing instances of, them trying to sort of push out fixed deposit, recurring deposit type of products for low-income populations. And this might help in bringing a bigger, swathe of customers into the ecosystem. Again, like I just mentioned, we believe that EKO as a technology service provider going forward might be more successful as a business correspondent. And finally, the Central Regulatory Bank in India is, trying to get everyone, all the business correspondents, to use sort of biometric information for identifying customers uniquely. And I believe EKO is currently working on that technology for that reason. And, who knows, it's going to be much more better. So, yeah, with that, I'm done.
Thank you. And our next talk is called A Work Practice Approach to Understanding Actors in Agricultural Markets, Revisiting the Fishermen of Kerala, India. Jenna Burrell and Janaki Srinivasan, as well as Richa Kumar, who does not appear to be. Okay.
All right, so we have 2 members of our 3-member team here today. I'm going to set up this talk with just a few introductory comments and talk a little bit about conceptually what we were trying to do with this project. And then Janaki, who is the one who actually did the field work in Kerala, I didn't get to do any field work on this project, will explain what she found in the field. So I thought it would be important to kind of specify with this project that we're actually not talking about mobile money at all. We're not talking about the mobile phone as a platform for the actual transfer of value, but for disseminating timely information about the value of goods, in particular price information. And this notion that price information is a variable and fluctuating element in decision-making about trade. One of our questions is, of what value is this kind of pure information about prices? Our field site was the fisheries and fisherfolk of Kerala, and our first encounter with this field site is sort of interesting, I think. It was through an influential journal article, a journal article that was not in our own discipline, but in economics. And it's a paper by the economist Robert Jensen titled The Digital Provide Information Technology, Market Performance, and Welfare in the South Indian Fisheries Sector. And this particular paper, which I would recommend everyone read if they haven't already, has really become canonical in a field that we participate in called Information and Communication Technology and Development. So I'm going to ask a couple questions and let you stretch your arms. The first question is, how many people here have heard somewhere in the mass media, in conversations, in academic conferences, or wherever, this particular assertion, that mobile phones help farmers get better market price information? Okay. And how many people have heard particularly of Robert Jensen's study on mobile phone use among fishermen in Kerala, India? Okay, a smaller number. And for those of you who didn't get to stretch your hands, your arms, how many people have heard of neither of these things? Okay, everyone stretched their arms now. Good, okay. So we see a connection between the concern of Robert Jensen's article on fishermen in Kerala and this sort of pithy statement that's been in widespread circulation in the ICTD community and elsewhere, that farmers or fishermen use mobile phones to acquire market price information and are therefore able to, A, get a better price for their goods, and it's sometimes also claimed that they're able to bypass exploitative middlemen. We wanted to investigate that notion further, partly in light of some doubts about the universality of that claim, stemming from some of our own fieldwork in other sites. In particular, my fieldwork in Ugandan fishing communities. So to kind of get us into this talk, I need to explain a little bit what Jensen's piece actually found and how it was carried out. And I'm going to have to change slides now. Okay, so you don't actually have to understand this formula. This is from his article. What he did, it's actually a very ingenious study. He went to northern Kerala in 1997. He set up a team to collect survey data from a bunch of fishing units on the price they were able to sell their fish for over a period of 5 years, 1997 to 2001. And in that time period, mobile phones were introduced in the region. And so what he was able to find from the survey work over all of those years was that prices actually stabilized. And he also found that the profits that fishermen got were higher, including large units and small units, after the arrival of the mobile phone. And this was taken as some very exciting and kind of convincing evidence about the impact of mobile phones on trade. So we used this article as a starting point, and in particular, we were attentive to its way of representing that field site. And we were doing that to set ourselves up for a kind of comparative analysis between a parsimonious model and a complicated reality. What we wanted to do was to start with that model and then return to the empirical situation where the model was derived. And what we didn't do an economic study, we did an ethnographic case study. Just as sort of a caveat, Janaki returned from the field last month, and we've only started to sort of delve into our analysis. So these are some of our preliminary findings. One difference in the way we approached the study is that we were trying to apprehend more directly the actual practices of phone use. So whereas Jensen works backwards from indirect evidence, price information, prices stabilizing over a time period, we wanted to actually talk to fishermen and fish traders about what they were doing with their phones, what kind of calls they were making, who they were calling, what decisions they were making. So we were also trying to get at a kind of ethnographic holism, trying to account for the whole story of the region, its economic and political history, how it was situated in the world, and to basically unpack the elements of this model and to render it more complex. This was not to sort of check on this particular form of economic accounting to disprove it. This economic model and an ethnographic case study are not directly commensurable, but we think it's really interesting to put them in dialogue. And so for what purpose are we trying to make a mess out of a really nice, neat, compelling, and clear model? Partly was to address questions of generalizability. So we think that's actually a conversation that was closed down and concluded prematurely, or perhaps was never really seriously undertaken. And we wanted to raise and attempt to answer a question that is not unique to our own disciplinary approach that interests economists as well, which is what are the conditions that make the mobile phone useful for sourcing and comparing market prices in a way that improves trade-related decision-making? And what we ultimately found, just to kind of lead to our conclusions, is that fishing in North Kerala was quite a special case. And we've kind of accumulated a growing list of conditions. And one really interesting thing is that it didn't really even generalize to South Kerala. Go ahead.
So just to review the setting and the actors from Jensen's paper. Jensen's research was conducted in the 3 northernmost districts of Kerala, and he talks essentially about a producer who has the boat and goes out to sea to fish. The fish in question was sardines, which was Jensen's focus in his paper, and this fish is then auctioned in a beach market or a fish landing center to a consumer or a buyer. So it was within this situation that mobile phones made an appearance in 1997. And we, in the following slides, we are trying to complicate these broad categories and see what we get. As Jenna mentioned, what we are trying to do basically is twofold. We were first trying to, we had a couple of field sites, one in North Kerala and one in Southern Kerala in the district of Trivandrum. And what we were trying to do basically was to find out how complicated the picture was even within North Kerala, and then try and understand how fishing transactions work within South Kerala and see if there are any differences. And at the outset, there are 2 differences that we want to think about moving forward. One is that just the geography and the physical conditions in north and on the northern and southern coastline are quite different. So one of the differences is that the northern coastline is sandy while the southern coastline is rocky. And this influences the kind and the size of the boats that can actually be operated in the two regions. Another physical difference is that southern Kerala suffers much more adversely from the monsoons, which means that some of its fish landing centers and harbors are not open throughout the year, which is different than in the north. In terms of the fishing community itself, the northern side that we looked at is a predominantly Muslim community, whereas the southern community is Christian. And we'll see how both these natural and religious cultural factors play into how fishing transactions take place. So the first thing that we found at both sides was that the category of a producer or a seller is actually not really a single category. So you can see here a variety of sizes and types of boats. In addition to the boats themselves, fishermen also use a variety of different kinds of nets, hooks and lines and so on to fish. And the reason this is important is because, as I mentioned earlier, in North Kerala, much larger boats are in use. So for example, on the upper right-hand side, you see what is called a ring seine boat, which can have a crew upward of 50 people. It will get back between 3 to 12 tons of fish, typically single variety, typically sardines. Whereas some of the smaller boats that you see at the bottom get in only between 1 to 1.5 tons of fish, and also a much greater variety, so not a single variety of fish. And this is especially true in the south coast, which has even smaller boats that can have a crew ranging anywhere between 2 to 10 people, but where the catch is at most in hundreds of kgs, and again consists of much greater variety in every boatload. The important thing for us to carry away from the slide is that the investment involved in equipment in northern and southern Kerala tends to be really, really different because of the size of boats that are going out to sea. If the producer or seller was not a single category, nor is the consumer or the buyer, in both the south and the north, buyers consist of really small scale vendors who sell either right at the beach, as you can see here, or they might sell in retail markets, or they might go house to house selling. There are also people who salt or dry fish, or they take them to waste processing factories. And finally, there are the wholesale merchants or exporters who take the fish in large insulated trucks to other destinations. And here again, the differences between the predominantly Muslim north and the Christian south are quite significant. And the reason I say this is because in the north, women are not involved at all in the sale of fish, mostly due to religious considerations. But in the Christian south, women actually form a large part of the small vendors who sell fish. And this also possibly explains why women are never really mentioned in Jensen's paper, which focuses on the north. But we found that gender is a really important factor for us because the constraints and resources that were available to male vendors and female vendors were actually really, really different. And this also had some implications for how important they found price information or how they chose to use mobile phones. So putting all of this together in one grand, complicated picture, let's see where we go from here. So we already know that instead of a producer, there are various categories of producers, and there are also different types of fish, sardine being only one of a very particular variety among many. The other part, which is a new actor that we now see, is an investor auctioneer. So the transaction actually does not take place directly between the producer and the consumer. It is in fact, the key actor here is an investor auctioneer. This is a person who has invested in the boat and in return for investing gets a percentage share of the sales and also gets the right to auction that fish. So when the fish is brought into shore, the producer hands it over to the investor auctioneer. He is expected to, unless there are seasonal reasons why he would go to other markets to sell these. And the investor auctioneer then auctions this at the fish landing center to various categories of buyers who I've already mentioned, the export agent, the wholesale agent, a fish vendor, or a waste processor. We also have another new interesting actor here who's probably the only one that's not part of this auction, who's what I'm calling a scavenger. Basically a person who hangs around on the beach, tries to find opportunities when no one's looking and he can get a couple of fish from boats, or also sometimes in transferring fish from the boat to auctioning, some fish fall off, so they'll pick those up and they'll go conduct their own auctions on the side. So that is a group that we are not really looking at here. Another new actor who we met particularly in the south is a church tax collector who possibly has the best sense of what's going on at a fish landing center, because he ends up collecting a 1% tax from both the buyer as well as the seller for every single transaction that takes place. And people don't really resent that actually, because they see it as something that goes to the church, and the church then supports the local school and so on. So this is actually the scenario in which mobile phones function. And I should mention here that not everyone has a mobile phone. Some of them are more likely to than other people. Like some of the fish vendors, especially the very small ones, might not have cell phones. But what is even more interesting is that they all use it in really different ways. And before I go into that, I just want to, this is where I'll talk a little bit about, looking at this diagram, who are the different actors who really find price information very important in their decision making. And I'm going to use mainly the example of the producers to try and understand two situations. One is, how is price information differently important between large and small scale producers within North Kerala? And then how is it different between producers in North and South Kerala? As I've already mentioned, the boats in North Kerala tend to be really big, and the investment for such boats also tends to be really much higher than in the south. And when I say higher here, I mean between 12 to 15 times the price, the investment that's involved in the south. So that's one thing. And as a result of that, typically there are multiple investors in each boat in the north. And very strategically, the producers try and draw these investors from different markets, from multiple markets. So regardless of where they go to sell their fish, they have a trusted auctioneer through whom they can sell that fish. So that's one thing. The other thing is also geographically, the north has all these fish landing centers which are much close to each other, and they are open throughout the season. So for these two reasons, fishers actually have find it feasible to sell in different markets. And if you have a large enough boat, and if you get back a large enough catch, then it is actually possible that selling in another place, which has even a small difference in price, can make a huge difference to you. But you find that even within the north, people who bring in much smaller catches don't find it as important to find out the prices, because they'll need a really big difference in price to be going to another place to sell. And when we come down to the south, where investments are much smaller, you find that typically there's only one investor in a boat, and you're tied to that person and you're expected to sell where that person is auctioning. So you will not be as interested in prices in other places. So price information actually turns out to be something that basically the large boat owners are the most interested in, the ring scene boats that I showed in the north. You can have similar arguments also for buyers, but I'm going to look at only the producers today. So all this said does not mean that mobile phones are not extremely popular in Kerala. And I would just like to point to a few instances where they are useful, especially in what we call coordination work. So fishers, for example, mention that when they can't find fish in the sea, they call up their friends or kin to find out where they have found fish that day. And then they use the phone, these directions on the phone in conjunction with a GPS to land up at that location and fish. So that is one thing that most of them mentioned. The other one is in case of emergencies, like if you have a malfunctioning engine, while you're out at sea, you try to call up the shore to find out ways to be rescued. Then they also try and call up their auctioneer when they're closer to the shore to make sure that the auctioneer is there to auction their fish. And in case they have a large catch, that he'll also arrange for things like ice and so on. At the buyer end of the spectrum, export agents, I think, really find it very useful to coordinate. They sometimes use it to call up the truck drivers who are transporting the fish to the actual export company. Or they also use it to find out the supply of fish in different markets so that they can consolidate it and get the targeted amount that the export company expects from them each day. The small fish, the women fish vendors is an especially interesting case because as women, they're expected to take care of their families, and as vendors, they often spend 12 to 14-hour work days when they're outside the house. And very often there's nobody else at home either, because the male folk would be at sea at unpredictable times. So this used to cause them a lot of mental stress, and a lot of them mentioned this as a big advantage of having mobile phones, that they could constantly stay in touch. So price information is not the only use for phones, and different people use it in different ways for all these functions. And we wanted here to also think a little bit more about different definitions of welfare, and how it's not only about changes in income, but can affect people in a variety of other ways. So going quickly on, we also had, we wanted to make the point that there have been several kinds of generalizations on this article, and we just want to touch on three. In going from the reality to Jensen's article to the ways in which it has been picked up in other articles and popular press. So we start with a really complicated situation of many kinds of actors, and this gets reduced progressively in Jensen's article, where he chooses to focus on one kind of fish, producers and consumers, to other articles which then talk even more broadly about fishermen and fish. A second kind of generalization is in the use of phones, where you start off with a condition where there are many users of phones, go to one where the chief use seems to be price information, and finally to a situation where they are said to lead to better prices and reduce wastage. And a third way in which generalization happens is in going from the region of North Kerala to often references to all of Kerala, or even to the developing regions in some ways. And this pointed us to the idea of deleted modalities, which Jenna will talk very briefly about.
Okay. We have just, actually, I'll just skip ahead to the concluding slide. So in conclusion, why take a nice, neat, simple model and reduce it and expand it to something extremely complicated? We think there are a couple of really important takeaways. One is that the use of those kind of broad categories of fishers or buyers, we found conceals the full range of economic and social circumstances within those broad groups. And in particular, lower income groups are most frequently obscured when we're relying on those kinds of aggregates and averages. There's also a sort of we think a limit on scholarly imagination about the necessary conditions that make market price information useful, and that you really need to start doing those kinds of comparisons to see whether this sort of behavior holds anywhere else. Consequently, following from this sort of generalization of the full model to this idea of fishermen or farmers using phones to get market price information, that a very kind of select few set of ideas are being taken up and turned into systems. So here's our one design implication. Systems like these very widespread SMS-based market price information systems that you see all around the world, which often trace their origins to this one particular study. We found that actually there are qualitatively different uses of the phone that could be attended to when you look at the diversity of fishermen and buyers and sellers, and new ways of designing that will reach those lower income groups.
All right, thanks for that. Okay, and finally, our last panelist is Eric Ose Asibe, who is going to present on e-Susu operation. Can mobile money revolutionize an ancient savings system among indigenous West Africans?
Thank you. Thank you all. I know you're all very tired. I'm tired myself, and I know you can't wait to dismiss me from here. I will dismiss myself anyway if I keep too long. So I thank you, but first of all, let me also thank IMTFI for the opportunity to be here. Thank you, Bill and Jenny and John, as well as Ivan and all the crew members. In fact, you've been very great supporting the project up to this far. My study, as you can see, is to study e-Susu operation, that is whether mobile money can revolutionize an ancient savings system in Ghana. Okay, so this is the outline that I'm going to follow. I will try to be brief. If I'm taking too long, you can just raise your hand hand up and sack me from here. So don't worry. Okay. So what is Susu operation? Susu is an ancient forms of saving, informal form of saving that has been with the people of West Africa, indigenous West Africa, for many years. It involves people collecting, going around, that is the Susu operators going around and collecting bits of money, small money from market women, from low-income earners, from roadside stores and hawkers and other things, to keep this money for them on rolling basis, so that every month they will return their money and keep one day's contribution. It's quite old and is known mainly among people of West Africa. In Nigeria, I think it's known as Isusu among the Yorubas. And then in Ivory Coast or Cote d'Ivoire, it's known as Nago. And then in Togo, which is also a neighboring country, is known as is it Najuma? And a host of other countries across the West African region. Why is Susu still important, even in this modern time, where there are mushrooming number of MFIs, banks, and what have you? Features of Susu that still make people still want to use as a micro form of saving is because the operators have a very good knowledge of the local market. They know the intricacies of the market. They know when to go for collection and when not to go. It's also quite convenient. It's from a doorstep kind of services from door to door. And so it's very flexible for the market women who don't really have time to leave their ward to go and join queues in the bank. So the market women found it very more convenient, and also very little or no bureaucracy and paperwork. You know, most of these market women are illiterate, and therefore they don't like the idea of going to bank and fill cumbersome paper forms and other things. So it's good for them, and also flexible to adjust to changing circumstances, as in the form of emergencies. If you're doing contribution, at a point you can recall your money if you think you need the money that bad. And so it gives them some kind of flexibility to the use of their money and all. And quick turnaround time, as well as is a way of providing micro savings opportunity for these unbanked, the large unbanked section of the economy. Oh, sorry about that. So, okay. So that, but then there's also a flip side. The disadvantages of the Susu is it depends largely on trust, because there often no legal documentation, or some of them do not even know the names of their operators or where they live, or wherever they can find them. So it's mainly based on trust. So if anyone decides to abscond with your money, there's no way you can trace such a person. It doesn't involve any legal documentation, paperwork, no, except with a piece of card in their hands. So as you can see, just a piece of book to record the daily contributions and all. And so these obvious operational, it culminates into operational inefficiencies in that it leads to high transaction costs, because that is the demerit side. People have to use, or either they have to walk or use bicycle and motorbikes, and therefore the scope is limited, as well as the skills, because they cannot cover a large area because of transportation issues and all. Also, because of the fact that they have to walk with huge sums of money, they are usually prone to robbery and attacks here and there. And there are also charlatans ones among them. Some people somehow bought with other people's money. They just abscond and they will be nowhere to be found. And because the system is not well regulated, there's no legal framework or regulations guiding them, sometimes it's very difficult to trace or to enforcement of repayment. Thus, for these reasons or these setbacks, they have not been able to actually serve the needs of these unbanked, the large unbanked and untapped informal sector that constitutes about 80% of the workforce in Ghana. Many of them are still outside the mainstream financing and they do not have access to any form of financing. But the issue is mobile money the answer? Can mobile money, the rapid diffusion of technology and infrastructure advancement, can they actually leverage on this modern technology to reduce the inefficiencies and high costs in the SUSU operations and still maintain the SUSU operators or the SUSU users, the micro savers, the easiness to save and to set aside money, whether that could be possible to use this mobile money instead of the people coming around every day to collect the money. They can just test the money to them wherever that they are, and that would reduce the incidence of theft, transaction cost, walking or riding on bicycle and being prone to theft. Is it possible in this sense? Okay, I will just keep here since Vivian and colleague had talked more about the state of money in Ghana. And to go to the specific issues that this research seeks to investigate. One, we seek to find what factors are influencing the use of SUSU as a store of value or micro-serving infrastructure. Are there any social or cultural practices that bind people to these services? Despite all the financial services, what is really explaining why people still keep to the SUSU operations in Ghana? And then also, what is the extent of usage or knowledge of mobile money within the SUSU operation by both operators and the savers? And finally, we want to, what factors will determine the SUSU operators and the users' willingness to accept or use mobile money in place of the traditional practices? Actually, there's one more. Will the use of mobile money complement or substitute the work of SUSU operators? So these are the questions that we seek to find answers to. The conceptual framework, is there any conceptual framework underlying this study? Yes, we try to use the conceptual framework by Rogers 1962 about the innovation adoption theory. And in the innovation adoption theory, he seeks to explain how, why, and at what rate new ideas and new technologies spread through cultures over a period of time. And in fact, Rogers in 1962 said that the process of adoption actually goes through the awareness stage to the interest, and then to evaluation stage, and then to the trial stage, and then adoption stage. But this process was actually changed in 1995, where he said that the adoption stages for innovation actually move from the knowledge of innovation, which is key, to forming an attitude towards the innovation, that is the persuasion, being able to persuade the potential user, and deciding to adopt or reject the innovation, which is another stage. And then we have the implementing the new idea, as well as the confirming the innovation decision. So with this framework, I put together this flow chart that actually underpins the whole process, the whole complexities of mobile money adoption. And so we have the knowledge base, the persuasion stage, the decision stage, implementation, and then the confirmation. Now, the decision is either to reject or to accept. Now, what will underpin the acceptance or the rejection will depend upon the individual heterodox characteristics or demographic characteristics, as well as social context, the cultural and other things, and then also the regulatory framework or the policy contexts that exist in every community or area. Then if it's decided to accept the subscription or if they decide to subscribe to it, the extent of usage will depend upon the level of competition or the marketing, costs and price, and then also the education and promotional campaigns, advisory services, education training, research and development. So all these explains, what Vivian and Doug actually talked about, the reason why we have low uptake in Ghana. These are the intricacies that the whole system found itself. If you do not put all these in context or look at these issues holistically, you may be missing the point. And then subscription, after accepting, what next? What is the consequences? Does it have any impact, benefits to the user? Socially, what is the welfare gain or any social transformation that a person stand to gain? And then economic productivity, what would they gain if they switched from using SUSU operator to testing their money? And so these are the conceptual framework that underlie the whole adoption that I try to put together. Okay, so the actual work itself, the sampling design and methodology, we use three-pronged approach that is focusing on the traditional SUSU operators, those that go to the market to collect the money, and then the SUSU users, as well as the telecom operators. So these are the three key players that we seek to seek their minds as to how best to adopt this technology in the SUSU operations. Now, the location and stratification, we have the Accra, that is the capital city of Ghana, and we actually sample 10 main local markets, and then also Kumasi, the second largest market or city in Ghana. Also, we sample 6 local markets. And this is a typical market that you can usually find. That is huge informal sector and with varying or different types of product being sold in these markets. So sampling methodology, we use structured questionnaires and the focus group discussion to try to capture the data. So preliminary results, some of the are missing. I just tried to put a lot of things together here. Now, so this is for the SUSU operators. That is the first set. The age distribution, we have the greater number of them being below 30, more than 50%, and quite significant, 27% above 40 years. Educational level of the SUSU operators is mostly, many of them are senior high school leavers, and then also quite a number also have had tertiary education. Average income per day for these SUSU operators, the greater number, many about 23%, and just about 50 Ghana cedis, which is about 25 or $26 thereabout. Also equal number have greater amount, about $1,000 or $500. These are the big SUSU operators, and so on and so forth. And average amount collected from a client daily, we have about 62% collecting just between 1 to 5 Ghana cedis. Just that is about 50 cents to $2.5 that a day from the market's women. So this is a typical one. This is a Goyi SUSU enterprise that we captured. And there are 2 forms. There's one that is actually located within the market centers where the market women actually walk to them and make payment on daily basis. And there are other ones where the operator himself walk to the market women wherever they are and collect the daily contribution or payments. And so this is one. Now, the use of mobile phone by these operators, we realize that many of them, about 39 say that often they call their clients. About 40 say sometimes, 15 say they hardly ever do that. Okay, thank you. Now, when we ask questions about adoption, the degree of adoption of mobile money, awareness, whether they are aware of mobile money, we had quite a good number says that they are actually aware of mobile money, about 83%. Perceived feasibility, that is whether they perceived mobile money to be feasible in deploying in the SUSU operation. We have 50-50. 50% says yes, it is feasible to adopt mobile money in their operations. However, 50% think otherwise. And then also perceived threat of mobile money, that is actually depriving them of their job or income. Some of 59% think that if the mobile money is adopted, they will lose their jobs, and therefore they don't think it's quite good for them. Willingness to adopt or to accept, we have 62.2% think says that yes, they are willing to accept mobile money. Okay. Now, with this actually talk about the SUSU users themselves, the educational background, about 17% are not educated at all. They haven't been to any school. The majority are just junior high school, primary school level, 52%. In terms of average daily income, we have about 66% earning less than 50 Ghana cedis, that is $25 a day. These reasons of choosing SUSU and all, let me move on to, this is a typical market area with huge untapped market for SUSU operators. Now, mobile money questions. Whether they are aware of mobile money, about 76.9% says that they are actually not aware of mobile money. Experience with money transfer via mobile money, only 2.4 says that they have actually experienced it or sent money through mobile money system. Willingness to use mobile money, only 40.9% says yes, they are willing to test their money through phones to the SUSU operators. When we crossed-up education and willingness to accept, we realize that education plays a very significant role, because those that do not have formal education, 75% of them say that they are not willing to use mobile money. And when we asked why, the overwhelming answer was not enough knowledge on the use of money, phones. They are not conversant with using phones. Some of them have never used their phones to test or to test message or whatever. So the main reason being that they are not conversant with mobile money. They are not sure whether their money will be delivered and all other things. Okay, findings from a focal group discussion that we have with some of the SUSU operators. Many of them no technology use. They don't apply any technology at all in their business. Users have absolute trust because of proximity. They think that their services are key because their presence alone motivates the market women to contribute their daily payments. And therefore, if the mobile money is deployed, many of them can easily default. Many operate night shifts in order to keep their collected money away from robbers. Now, pessimism, knowledge in mobile phones and safety. Some of them, they are not too conversant with how to use the mobile phone, so they think because of that it will not really work well for them. And then also safety of the money. They don't seem to trust the mobile operators too well. And then possible irregularity of payments and diminished trust. Now, if the market women do not see them, they may not be regular in payments. And then optimism, many are hopeful of becoming agents, particularly the mobile phone operators. And so let me just keep this one. Now, this one I'll just briefly, if you can spare me just a minute. It prevents, these are the SUSU users thinking about the use of mobile money. They say that why they still use mobile money. When we had a group discussion, it prevents incessant, that is why they still use SUSU operations, incessant demand from relatives and attacks by thieves. That is the main reason why they still want to use SUSU every day or save. And many hear of defraud and other things. They hear that people defraud others in the SUSU operation, yet they still want to use it because they find it more flexible and able to identify with it. A higher percentage does not know where the operators reside or operate. They prefer if the operators work every day, including holidays. they doubt the reliability of the mobile money transfer, whether somebody says that what happens if my phone gets lost, it means my money would also get lost in the process. So the awareness is very low among these people. Okay, tax to completion. Now what we seek to do next is to go to the mobile phone operators to ask them what they think will be the best way of adopting mobile money in the social operations. And then the next is to undertake a quantitative analysis of the survey data to determine factors that that are important in explaining willingness to accept or reject mobile money by operators using simple logistic regression analysis, and then have a draft report and submit a paper for journal publication. Thank you very much for
Thank you, everybody. Excuse me. I think we'll follow the last panel's tradition and go with collecting about 3 questions for the panel, and then they'll address them. And so, do we have the microphone? Sorry. Thanks. So there's the first one. Great. Oh, of course, and say who you are and where you're from. Thanks.
I'm Dipti from Center for Microfinance, and my question is for Janaki and Jensen. So I think this is a very interesting study that both of you are doing. My question is, I think they are getting price information, right? So I was just wondering how volatile the price, like is it fluctuating on a daily basis? And if once they get information, does this information on pricing affect the investment decision of the fishermen or others, if you covered that portion? Thank you.
I think we should collect 3, and because we did lose about 10 minutes at the start. So let's everyone ask brief questions, and then we'll be able to tackle them all, hopefully.
Okay, my name is Abna from Ghana Technology University College. I have 2 quick questions. One for Eric. I know that some formal financial institutions in Ghana are also engaged in SUSU activities. I'm wondering whether you captured them in your research. And then one for Jenna and Richard. I found it very interesting when you talked about the church tax collectors. Can you tell me the relationship between them and then the non-Christians in the southern part of your study area?
It looks like you can just pass it right down, and then the next round will be on this side of the room.
Okay, my name is Dunge Kiti from Kenya, but teaching in New York. Thank you to all the presenters. Excellent research and presentations. My question is mainly for Eric. The model you used often includes a strong component of gatekeepers in terms of innovation. I was curious, who are the gatekeepers for the SUSU process? Because the framework you used often emphasizes gatekeepers. And then the fact that operators were so young, is there an issue of trust that the majority of your operators seem to be, from a technological perspective, it seems that, yeah, young people would be great, but from a African cultural trust issue, I'm wondering whether that plays a role in adoption. So.
Okay, great. So let's have our panelists address those 3 questions succinctly so we can hear from the audience again.
So regarding the price information and fluctuations, the fluctuation is actually a lot. It depends a lot on the fish variety. So if you have an export variety, for example, it depends a lot on the exchange rate that day, the demand, and so on. So that's one reason. The other reason it fluctuates is also because the supply is not predictable. So day to day, the variety of fish that you catch will really change. So depending on if there's a lot of one kind of fish, then its price will drop. So that's why within like a week, I saw one particular variety whose price went up from 100 rupees a kg to 140 because export demand for it had been raised. So that was one. I was not quite sure of the investor question. So because investment decisions are slightly more long-term, so someone who invests in the boat knows already that there's going to be this fluctuation, and to a certain extent takes that chance that over a period of time it will sort of even out. And so I don't think it drastically influences investment decision. What does influence investment decision is that there's been a lot of money flowing in because of Kerala's traditional migration patterns to the Gulf. So I think over the last 10, 15 years, that has definitely fueled how many fishing craft are out there on the sea. So that was one. Regarding the tax collector, so this was a practice that's been going on for about 15 years now, and every transaction that happens on that beach gives the church 2% of the sales revenue of that transaction. And this money basically is supposed to go to the church, which runs a public school in the area, and also sometimes supports families of fishermen who are lost at sea and other such family in situations of critical times for families, I guess. So that's what it goes to.
Great. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Thank you for your questions. Yes, let me attempt to respond to the first question, asking whether my study captured the formal banking system that tried to use the social operations. Not exactly, because this study tried to look at the indigenous form of the social operations. Now, with the formal system, they have tried to adopt the SUSU system, but it is not exactly the SUSU. What they do is that they get people into the market and then open accounts for these market women and go around to collect the money and save on their behalf. That is quite different from the traditional SUSU system where an operator goes around and take the monies and at the end of the month return the money by keeping 1 day's commission. And so there's that kind of difference between the two systems. And then also my Kenyan friend asked about the framework that I presented, whether there are no gatekeepers. Yes, the framework actually focused on the adoption side, the users part largely. That is the process of adoption. So not so much about the regulators and then the operators. But at least you can also see that from the policy context and then the market side. At least if you want to do an expansion, you can expand it from that side. Last question was you want to find out the age, why the age group, greater number of them are below 30. I think what can explain that is because of the laborious nature of these social operations. You know, they have to walk and walk and walk to reach every member in the scheme. So it's quite difficult for old people. So most people, they tend to graduate. We have the older social person who employed school graduates or leavers to go out there and collect the money on their behalf. So obviously these people will be much younger, you know, but the owners of the social operators are much older. These are about 40 years. And so thank you.
Okay, great. So now, I don't know exactly where the mic is, but let's take this side of the room this time. So hands up, please.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Okay,
Thank you for the very insightful presentations. This goes to Eric. Eric, I think your paper will form a good segue to achieving the objectives of the March 12th, 13th conference. Will you be willing to just yes or no, yes, formally ask you to submit?
Of course I will. Thank you.
I am Pradeep Besak from India. Questions to Bajpayee and Ishita. Look, there are several issues of trust that came in from the friend from Ghana who presented. Same actually questions comes in India. We have seen financial institutions functioning in the area of saving, in microfinance, insurance, and whatnot. Many of the cases we have seen right in the research I conducted, I found microfinance institutions actually charging exorbitant interest rate, not regulated. one saving company has came and took savings from the people, poor people, ran away. Poor people absolutely do not have any ability to fight against that. They absolutely have forgotten that. That's money saved, it's gone. So in case of mobile money, which is, which is virtual, you do not have a record also that such money has actually gone for remittance. If the issue of how to tackle the defaulter in case the company actually defaults, and if the person who has sent by remittance, if his money is not got back, if there is mechanism for protection of his, if not investment, remittance, then if that credibility issue is not taken care, I'm unsure if actually this mechanism works. I'm not sure if it has come under your research.
Okay, there was a question up front.
Thank you very much. This is for Eric on Susu. Susu in my language means grandmother, but in this case it's not about grandmother. From the previous answer you gave, it was not very clear whether there is any financial inclusion product that has tried to emulate Susu. Faithfully taking advantage of the merits and trying to get rid of the demerits. Has there been any effort to try to emulate that in an electronic form, like a mobile banking product, specifically trying to do that?
Okay, great. And so we can take one more question and then go to the panelists. Looks like Vivian has one.
Question for Eric. There was, I believe, a government move either last year or early this year to have all the Susu dealers registered. I was wondering whether that had any impact, whether it came up in your interviews about people's perceptions of the trustworthiness of Susu dealers since now they're being regulated compared to how they were before.
Okay, let's move back to the panelists then.
In terms of, I think your question was more about if there is a breakdown, how EKO as the agent really handles it. If there is a technology glitch where sort of a transaction has been initiated and that isn't complete, or if the server is down or something along those lines, then I believe there is a formal mechanism through which they can be redressed. Like the customer can approach EKO and they can work out how to get the money back to the customer, etc. If it involves something like the agent, running away with the money or something along those lines, then I believe, and Mani can correct me if she knows better, then I believe there's no formal mechanism of addressing that issue, but it is handled on a sort of case-by-case basis, where you can call the EKO representatives and they'll work with you, hopefully, to sort that out. But I mean, it has been a recurring issue in mobile money in general, where agent fraud and issues like that don't really have a very formal mechanism of of addressing that issue in the first place. So it's a good point you bring up.
Oh, it looks like he's going to answer.
If you're talking about the larger scale, sort of like the system itself, like coming down, I think Nokia Money was operating in India, and as far as we could understand, we spoke to a couple of the agents. Nokia Money was doing quite well, as in like it was profitable for agents, customers liked it, but I don't think it was profitable for Nokia. So I think they shut it down, and I think the customers are like still coming in, like every so often a customer shows up and says like, he's like sort of scandalized to find out that the service doesn't exist anymore. They can still get their money out, but it's a longish kind of process. So, I mean, yeah, there are no clear safeguards, so it's a case-by-case thing. Money. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So the issue of trust has come back because the CSPs are promoting it and the money and the mobile
Okay, Eric, you want to go?
All right. Thank you. Let me first answer the question about whether the former banking system tried to adopt this SUSU idea, SUSU system. Yes, there have been an attempt. I remember in 2005, Barclays Ghana actually engaged about 400 SUSU operators from the SUSU cooperative unit to try to use the idea of collecting money from these market women and then save on their behalf. So it's a partial adoption, but it didn't really take the exact form of the SUSU operations. You know, this one was a form of financial inclusion, try to help people to open an account, and then take their money and save on their behalf. That is quite different from the actual SUSU operation. That's the actual sense behind the SUSU operations, where these market women can pay any amount at all, and the money is returned to them on rolling basis. The banks is just a normal saving scheme, but the only thing is that they come to you and then they take the money. And so it actually not make the exact SUSU operations. So it didn't really work, because many of the SUSU operators found out that they were not making enough money from the bankers, as they have their own operations where they collect the money and keep one day's contribution. But now also the MFI, there are many microfinance institutions that are springing up, and they have also tried to leverage on this system. But of course, it doesn't still take the exact form as the SUSU operations, the way they link up with their clients. So that is about that. On the issue of regulations, this is quite recent, with the Bank of Ghana coming out with the Tier 4 regulations, where they try to regulate the SUSU system. But from our study, we found out that about 60% of them have not actually registered with this bank. And in fact, many of them do not really understand. They also are afraid of being taxed when they register. So the majority of them still operate under the unregulated informal sector. And therefore, I think the Bank of Ghana is going to have a very difficult task to try to climb down on this form of informal financing. It's going to be very difficult. Okay.
Okay, I believe we've run out of time, so any other questions you have for our excellent panelists, you can hit them at dinner, and let's give them a big round of applause.
Excellent, and thank you, Gustav, for chairing this panel. Before we break for our wine reception and our dinner, which is going to be in the same room where we had lunch, just a couple of little announcements and things to note. The first is for those of you who brought money objects. Katie Eagleton from the British Museum will be there at the reception, and you can go up and bring them to her and talk to her about them. Second, I know that some people are near to collapsing with exhaustion, but it's okay. The first bus is going to come and pick people up at 6:45. Okay, the early bus is 6:45. So if you're one of those people who really just needs to get to bed, get on the first bus. And then there's another one at 7, and there'll probably be a third after that. Tomorrow, right before lunch, we're going to do a group photograph. So I'll announce it again tomorrow, but there's going to be a group picture time. You all have to be there right before lunch tomorrow. And I wanted to say, again, I've mentioned that we've been live streaming this over the internet. There have been over 200 connections throughout the day, and there's right now about 20 people who are still following us, hanging on till the bitter end. And as I mentioned earlier, we're really privileged to have Liz Losh here from UC San Diego, who's been writing blogs about the event as it's been happening and then posting them. A couple of those are all, I know, yay. Well, do you know that, so the first one, 60 people have already clicked on and looked at. So, and I expect that more and more will. So that's there on the blog at blog.imtfi.uci.edu. So thank you again for that. With that, I know that people have a lot of ideas and a lot of topics for conversation to share. let's take them over a glass of something that away. And I'll see you at dinner and then again tomorrow. Thanks.